I have to confess, the feast of Our Lady of the Rosary is not a feast that I like to celebrate devotionally. It is, however, a feast that is among my favorites to celebrate historically, because unlike the month of October, which is known as the month of the Holy Rosary, in which we foster and promote the devotion to the Rosary, the Feast of Our Lady of the Rosary commemorates an event, an important historical event, in which the Rosary is attributed to that very important event in Western history and the history of the Church. Long before Our Lady of Fatima instructed the three children to pray the Rosary for peace, Pope St. Pius V called on the Catholic people to pray the Rosary for victory. For hundreds and hundreds of years, the Muslim forces had been a menace to Christian Europe. Even as early on as 732, just about 100 years after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, so much of northern Africa and the Middle East had been conquered by the Muslim forces. Spain had been overrun, until in 732, under the leadership of Charles Martel, the French forces in the Battle of Tours stopped that advance into Europe. As recently as 1453, the city of Constantinople, the capital of Byzantium, the last vestiges of the Roman Empire, had finally, after a long period of siege, fallen to the Muslim forces. And the Islamic forces had even penetrated as far west as Vienna, where Vienna was laid siege to in 1529. Now, in 1571, with Europe divided in the midst of the Protestant Reformation, the Ottoman Turkish Empire sought to take advantage of that division by putting together an invasion force in a great armada of ships for another assault on Christian Europe. The Holy League, a gathering of Catholic countries, put together their own fleet of ships to go out and confront the enemy that threatened Christian Europe. And on October 7th, the battle ensued. And in preparation for that battle, Pope St. Pius V called on the people to pray earnestly the Rosary so that this invading force that threatened Christian Europe would be beaten back and defeated. And on the day of battle, October 7th, 1571, on all of the ships, the Mass was celebrated to pray for victory in the upcoming battle, which we remember today as the Battle of Lepanto, in which the Christian forces were vastly outnumbered by the Muslim fleet. But by a stroke of good fortune and by the grace of God, in the midst of the battle, the wind changed, giving an advantage to the Catholic forces, and the Battle of Lepanto was a victory. In the aftermath of that victory, Pope St. Pius V declared a feast in which he declared the Virgin Mary to be Our Lady of Victory. His successor changed the name of the feast to Our Lady of the Holy Rosary. This was in 1573, and it has been celebrated by the Church throughout the centuries. In 1969, Pope John Paul VI simply called it Our Lady of the Rosary. But it is celebrated in gratitude for the great victory of the Battle of Lepanto, which is considered a major turning point in the history of the Church and the history of Western civilization. It is something we remember as we continue to see Christianity attacked and opposed by various forces. We've heard it from the Islamic forces in the Middle East in the last few years, but we've also heard of it in this country, where in the last few months there have been those leaders within our nation, even here in our local city of San Francisco, who have sought to take advantage of the pandemic to put down and silence the churches, and in particular the Catholic Church. We continue to see secular forces opposing and objecting to the message of hope and the gospel that Christ has given us to preach, hindering the work of the Catholic Church in many, many areas. And we give earnest thanks to God for those leaders in our nation who have been great advocates of the faith and the work of the Church. But we continue to pray the Rosary, ultimately for peace. But let us hear the call of our Archbishop from homilies he's given in the last couple of weeks for the event of the Rosary Rally and in the great Mass he celebrated in front of the church a couple of Sundays ago, in which, in rededicating the Archdiocese of San Francisco to Our Lady, he called on all of us, in addition to receiving the Eucharist and praying earnestly, to fast on Fridays. He also encouraged us to pray the Rosary. This is not a day in which we remember the Rosary devotionally, but we remember how turning to that devotion has had a great impact on history. And we too, as they did so many years ago in 1571, continue to pray the Rosary for victory, the victory of our faith, victory against the forces of Satan that seeks to put down the church, the victory of those forces that seek to overwhelm the church, victory against all leaders who use their influence to persecute the church throughout the world or to suppress the message of the church in our nation today. And we continue today in that call to return to prayer to Our Lady, to pray, yes, for the peace that only God can give, but ultimately in the struggles that the church faces, even down to today, that through prayer of the Rosary and intercession of Our Lady of Victory, we will find victory is ours in the preaching we are called to give, in the protection of our religious freedom and religious liberty in this country, and in the task that Jesus has given us in his victory on the cross to be instruments of the spread and the manifestation and the living of the gospel he has given us to profess.